If protecting Claire Parker costs me everything I've built, then maybe I built the wrong things. The moment Ethan Blackwell said those words, the entire room went silent. Thousands of cameras were pointed at him. Millions of people were watching from their phones, living rooms, airport lounges, and office break rooms across America. Reporters stopped typing. Investors stopped checking their stock prices. Even the television anchors seemed frozen for a heartbeat. I stood 3 feet away from him, barely able to breathe. My hands trembled so badly I had to clasp them together. The bright lights from the press conference stage blurred into white halos. None of this was supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to be standing beside the most powerful billionaire in the country while he risked his entire empire for me. 6 months earlier, Ethan Blackwell didn't even know my name. 6 months earlier, I was just Claire Parker, a third-grade teacher living in a small apartment in Brooklyn. My biggest worry was whether my students would pass their reading assessments before summer break. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a broken air conditioner. I bought generic coffee because the fancy brands were too expensive. My life was ordinary in every possible way. Ethan's life was the exact opposite. He owned skyscrapers, private jets, technology companies worth billions of dollars. Magazines called him a visionary. Financial networks called him a genius. Some people called him cold. Looking at him now, standing confidently behind the podium while the world waited for his next sentence, I understood why. Ethan never looked nervous. Not even today. Not when every major news outlet was broadcasting live. Not when his board of directors had publicly turned against him. Not when his own family had questioned his decisions. He simply adjusted the microphone and looked directly into the crowd. "I know many of you disagree with my choices," he said calmly. "You have that right. But I won't apologize for standing beside someone who has done nothing wrong." The reporters erupted with questions. Voices overlapped. Cameras flashed. The noise filled the room like a storm rolling across the ocean. My stomach tightened. This was my fault. At least, that's what everyone seemed to believe. Headlines had blamed me for weeks. Commentators discussed me as if I were some dangerous influence. Strangers online analyzed every photo they could find of me. My quiet life had become public property. Through all of it, Ethan never stepped away. He never distanced himself. He never pretended not to know me. Instead, he kept showing up. Again and again. The questions grew louder. One reporter stood and shouted, "Mr. Blackwell, are you really willing to lose your company because of her?" The room fell silent once more. Every eye turned toward Ethan. He glanced at me for only a second. Just long enough for me to see something in his expression that no camera could fully capture. Determination. Certainty. A promise he had already decided to keep. Then he faced the crowd again. "You keep asking the wrong question," he said. "The real question is why so many people expected me to abandon her in the first place." My heart stopped. Because at that moment, I realized this wasn't just a press conference anymore. It was a declaration. A line drawn in the sand. And none of them knew how this story had actually begun. None of them knew about the little girl standing alone in the rain 6 months earlier. None of them knew that one ordinary Tuesday had changed both of our lives forever. I used to believe that ordinary days stayed ordinary. The kind of days where nothing remarkable happened. The kind of days you forgot by the time you brushed your teeth that night. 6 months before that press conference, I woke up at 6:15 on a Tuesday morning to the sound of my neighbor's dog barking through the thin apartment walls. The sky outside my Brooklyn window was gray and heavy with rain. I remember standing in my tiny kitchen waiting for my coffee maker to finish brewing while reviewing spelling quizzes for my third-grade class. Nothing about that morning felt important. Nothing felt like the beginning of a story that would eventually end with the entire country watching my life unfold on television. By 7:30, I was driving through steady rain toward Jefferson Elementary. Traffic crawled across the Brooklyn streets. Windshield wipers moved back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm. The radio played weather updates warning people to avoid unnecessary travel. Most of my students arrived soaked despite umbrellas. Their sneakers squeaked against the classroom floor. Their backpacks dripped rainwater onto the tiles. By lunchtime, the storm had become even worse. Dark clouds swallowed the afternoon sunlight. The windows rattled every time a strong gust hit the building. Around 3 o'clock, the final bell rang. Parents filled the pickup area outside the school. Children ran toward waiting cars and umbrellas. Within 20 minutes, the building was nearly empty. I was gathering papers from student desks when Mrs. Jenkins from the front office poked her head into my classroom. "Claire, are you leaving soon?" she asked. "In a few minutes," I said. "Why?" She frowned. "There is a little girl outside near the front entrance. Nobody seems to know where her parents are." My stomach tightened immediately. Every teacher knows that feeling. The moment concern overrides everything else. I grabbed my coat and hurried toward the front doors. Rain hammered the sidewalk outside. Cars splashed through puddles. Under the covered entrance stood a little girl who could not have been older than 7. She wore a yellow raincoat and clutched a stuffed rabbit against her chest. Her blonde hair was damp. Her eyes were wide with worry. "Hey, sweetheart," I said gently, kneeling beside her. "Are you okay?" She nodded, then shook her head. "I cannot find my driver," she whispered. "He was supposed to be here." Her voice trembled. My heart broke instantly. "What is your name?" "Lily. Do you know a phone number we can call?" She looked down and shook her head again. Another gust of wind sent rain spraying beneath the awning. I slipped off my scarf and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Well, Lily," I said with a smile, "it looks like you and I are going to solve this together." She finally smiled back. It was small, barely visible, but it changed everything. Because neither of us knew that somewhere across Manhattan, one of the most powerful men in America had already started searching for her. The rain kept falling in steady sheets across the school parking lot. Lily sat beside me on a wooden bench near the front office, her small hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate that Mrs. Jenkins had made for her. Every few minutes, she glanced toward the glass doors as if expecting someone to appear. I kept smiling whenever she looked at me, even though I was starting to worry. Nearly 40 minutes had passed. Most of the teachers had already gone home. The hallways felt strangely quiet. Outside, the sky was turning darker by the minute. "Do you think you forgot me?" Lily asked softly. My chest tightened. "No," I said immediately. "I think somebody is probably very worried and looking for you right now." She nodded but did not look convinced. Then the front office phone rang. Mrs. Jenkins answered. Her expression changed almost instantly. She straightened in her chair and listened carefully. "Yes, she is here," she said. "She is safe." Relief washed across Lily's face before the call had even ended. A few minutes later, headlights appeared through the rain outside the school entrance. Not one vehicle. 3 large black SUVs pulled into the pickup area. Their headlights reflected across the wet pavement like ribbons of gold. The engines went silent. The front doors opened. Several people stepped out carrying umbrellas. They moved quickly but not frantically. Efficient. Focused. The kind of people who were used to solving problems. Lily jumped to her feet. "That is them," she whispered. The front doors opened, and a woman in her 40s rushed inside first. The moment she saw Lily, tears filled her eyes. She knelt and wrapped both arms around the little girl. "Thank goodness," she breathed. "You scared everyone." Lily hugged her tightly. I felt my own shoulders relax. The knot of worry that had been sitting in my stomach finally loosened. One of the men approached the front desk and spoke quietly with Mrs. Jenkins. Another thanked the school staff. Everything seemed under control. Then someone else walked through the doors. I noticed him immediately, although I could not explain why. He was tall, maybe 6'3", dark navy overcoat. Rainwater glistened across his shoulders. His posture was calm, but the entire room seemed to shift around him the moment he entered. People looked up. Conversations stopped. Even before I knew his name, I could feel the gravity he carried. His eyes found Lily first. Relief flashed across his face so quickly that most people would have missed it. Then he walked toward her. Lily ran straight into his arms. He lifted her effortlessly. For the first time all afternoon, she looked completely safe. Completely certain that everything would be okay. I smiled without realizing it. The man murmured something to her before finally looking in my direction. Our eyes met for only a second, long enough for me to notice how exhausted he looked beneath the polished appearance. Long enough for him to realize who I was. "You stayed with her?" he asked. His voice was calm and low. I nodded. Of course. Something unreadable crossed his expression. Gratitude, maybe. Respect. Whatever it was, it lingered for a brief moment before he extended his hand. "Thank you," he said. "You have no idea how much that means." At the time, I thought I was simply helping a lost child on a rainy afternoon. I had no idea that Ethan Blackwell would remember that moment long after everyone else forgot it. The next morning, life returned to normal. At least that was what I told myself. My alarm went off at 6:15. I graded math worksheets while eating toast over my kitchen sink. I drove through Brooklyn traffic. I taught fractions, reading comprehension, and science lessons about the water cycle. Children asked endless questions. The world kept moving exactly as it always had. Yet every now and then, I found myself thinking about the man from the night before. Not because he was famous. I barely followed business news. Not because he was wealthy. Money had never impressed me much. It was the look on his face when he saw Lily. For one brief second, all the confidence had disappeared. He had looked like any other person terrified of losing someone they loved. By Friday, I had almost forgotten about the entire incident. Almost. The final bell had just rung when a delivery driver appeared outside my classroom carrying an enormous bouquet of white lilies. Every student still packing their backpacks immediately noticed. Excited whispers spread across the room. "Miss Parker has a secret admirer," one of the boys announced dramatically. The entire class erupted into laughter. My face turned red. "Everyone finish packing and head to the buses," I said, trying not to smile. Once the room emptied, I looked at the flowers more closely. They were beautiful, fresh, expensive. Definitely not something anyone in my life could afford. A small card rested among the stems. "Thank you for your kindness. Lily is doing well. Ethan Blackwell." I stared at the card for several seconds. Then I laughed softly to myself. The gesture was thoughtful, unexpected, completely unnecessary. Most people would have forgotten my name by now. Yet somehow he had not. I placed the flowers on my desk and finished cleaning the classroom. Over the next week, life settled back into its familiar rhythm. Then another surprise arrived. Not flowers this time. A donation. 10 brand new computers delivered to Jefferson Elementary. No press release. No media coverage. No giant company logos. Just a note explaining that a donor wished to support educational opportunities for local students. The principal could not stop smiling. Teachers celebrated in the faculty lounge. Parents called to express their gratitude. Nobody knew who was responsible. Nobody except me. I recognized the signature at the bottom of the paperwork. Ethan Blackwell. What bothered me was not the donation itself. It was the timing. The computers arrived only days after he visited the school. Days after he saw how outdated our equipment was. Days after I casually mentioned that our students deserved better resources. The realization followed me home that evening. Sitting alone in my apartment, I stared out the window as city lights flickered against the darkening sky. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was not. Either way, something felt strange. Not threatening. Not uncomfortable. Just unusual. Powerful people did not usually notice ordinary teachers. They certainly did not remember offhand conversations about classroom budgets. Yet somehow Ethan Blackwell had. I told myself not to think about it anymore. I told myself our lives moved in completely different worlds. I told myself I would probably never see him again. Looking back now, that was the moment I should have known how wrong I was. 2 weeks passed without another surprise. No flowers. No donations. No mysterious notes. Gradually, I convinced myself I had imagined the significance of everything. Ethan Blackwell had thanked me for helping Lily. That was all. The rest was coincidence. Life returned to lesson plans, parent conferences, and stacks of papers waiting to be graded. Then came the annual city education fundraiser. I almost did not attend. The event was held at a hotel in Manhattan that looked more like a palace than a building. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings 3 stories high. Marble floors reflected golden light. Everywhere I looked, people wore tailored suits and elegant dresses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I spent 20 minutes standing in front of my closet before leaving my apartment that evening. In the end, I wore the same navy blue dress I had worn to my college graduation. It was simple, comfortable, familiar. As soon as I arrived, I felt out of place. Teachers clustered together near the back of the ballroom, while executives and donors occupied the center of the room. I was reaching for a glass of sparkling water when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "You look like you are planning an escape route." I froze. Then I turned. Ethan stood a few feet away, one hand resting in his pocket. The dark suit fit him perfectly. The bright ballroom lights reflected in his blue eyes. Around him, conversations seemed to pause for a moment before continuing. "Maybe I am," I admitted. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That makes 2 of us." I laughed before I could stop myself. "You own half the people in this room." "That is exactly why I want to leave." The answer caught me off guard. For a second, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man trapped inside a role he had been expected to play for too long. We spent the next 20 minutes talking near one of the ballroom windows overlooking the city. Not about business, not about money. We talked about books, teaching, childhood memories. Lily. The conversation felt surprisingly easy, natural, as if we had known each other far longer than a few brief encounters. Then a woman approached us. Tall, elegant, confident. Her diamond bracelet caught the light as she slipped her arm through Ethan's. There you are, she said warmly. The board has been looking for you. Her gaze shifted toward me. A polite smile appeared instantly. Practiced. Perfect. And who is this? Before I could answer, Ethan spoke. Claire Parker. Nothing more. No explanation. Yet something changed in the woman's expression. She recognized my name. I could see it immediately. She smiled again, but this time it did not quite reach her eyes. Ah, she said softly. Claire Parker. The way she said my name sent a strange chill through me. A few minutes later, Ethan was pulled away by investors and executives. I headed home shortly after. Standing alone on the subway platform, I replayed the evening in my mind. The conversation, the woman, the look she gave me. For the first time, I realized something important. Ethan Blackwell remembered me, not as a teacher who once helped a lost child, not as a random stranger. Somehow, somewhere along the way, I had become someone people around him were starting to notice too. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking everything. The woman at the fundraiser had probably recognized my name because of the school donation. That was the logical explanation. Unfortunately, logic became harder to trust when strange coincidences started piling up. It began on a Wednesday afternoon. My principal called me into her office just after lunch. I assumed it was about test scores or curriculum planning. Instead, she handed me a folder and smiled. Congratulations, she said. You have been selected for the City Excellence in Education program. I blinked. What program? A scholarship for teachers, leadership training, professional development. Fully funded. I stared at the paperwork. The opportunity was incredible. The problem was that I had never applied for it. There has to be a mistake, I said. There is no mistake, she replied. Your name was personally recommended. Personally recommended. Those two words followed me for the rest of the day. That evening, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the application packet and searched for the sponsoring organization. Blackwell Foundation. I closed my eyes. Of course, I should have known. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the acceptance form while my coffee grew cold. Most teachers would have signed immediately. The program could open doors for my career. It could help my students. It could change my future. Yet something felt wrong. Not because the opportunity was bad, because I had not earned it. At least not through the normal process. By lunchtime, I made my decision. I declined. 3 days later, my phone rang. You turned it down. I froze. The familiar voice on the other end sounded more surprised than angry. Hello, Ethan. A brief silence followed. Most people would not reject an opportunity like that. I looked out the classroom window at children running across the playground. Most people were probably supposed to apply first. To my surprise, he laughed. The sound was warm and genuine. Fair point. I appreciate the thought, I said carefully. But I do not want special treatment. Another pause. Longer this time. You think that is what this is? He asked quietly. Is it not? I expected him to argue. Instead, his voice softened. Claire, do you know why I noticed you in the first place? I leaned back in my chair. Because I happened to be standing next to Lily during a storm. No, the answer came immediately. I noticed you because everyone else was focused on finding the important person. You were focused on helping the frightened little girl. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. That is what teachers do, I replied. Not all of them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, children laughed across the playground. Inside, my classroom felt strangely quiet. Then Ethan exhaled softly. I am not trying to buy your gratitude, Claire. Then what are you trying to do? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Silence filled the line. Not uncomfortable silence. Careful silence. As though he was deciding how much truth to reveal. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. I think I am trying to make sure good people get the opportunities they deserve. After the call ended, I sat alone in my classroom staring at the phone. Because for the first time, I realized something even more unsettling than Ethan Blackwell noticing me. I was starting to notice him too. Over the following month, Something changed between us. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It happened in small moments that were easy to dismiss if I did not look too closely. A text message asking how a school fundraiser had gone. A phone call during my drive home after a difficult parent conference. An article about a children's literacy program that Ethan sent because he thought I would find it interesting. None of it felt romantic. None of it felt inappropriate. It simply felt easy. That was what made it dangerous. One Saturday morning, I arrived at school to prepare materials for the following week. The hallways were empty. The building felt peaceful. I spent nearly 3 hours organizing lesson plans before finally heading to a small coffee shop a few blocks away. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The smell of fresh pastries filled the air. I had just opened my laptop when someone pulled out the chair across from me. "You really do work all the time." I looked up and nearly dropped my coffee. Ethan smiled. "Good morning. What are you doing here?" I asked. I could ask you the same question. I laughed despite myself. "This is my neighborhood, and now it is mine for the next 10 minutes. He ordered coffee and sat down as if billionaire executives visited tiny Brooklyn cafes every day. Strangely, nobody seemed to recognize him. For the first time, I saw a version of Ethan that never appeared in magazines. Relaxed, unhurried, human. We talked for nearly an hour. About books, about childhood memories, about teaching. At one point, I asked him why he cared so much about education. The question changed everything. His smile faded slightly. His gaze drifted toward the rain outside. "My younger sister loved school," he said quietly. "More than anything." I waited. Something in his voice told me not to interrupt. She believed education could change every life it touched. A sad smile appeared. She used to say that teachers were the closest thing society had to everyday heroes. I swallowed hard. It was the first time I had heard genuine vulnerability from him. Not confidence. Not authority. Loss. "She sounds wonderful," I said softly. Ethan nodded. She was. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The noise of the cafe faded into the background. The rain continued sliding down the glass. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. "You remind me of her sometimes." The confession caught me completely off guard. "I do." He nodded once. "Not because you are similar. Because you care about people the way she did." My heart stumbled. Not because of the compliment. Because I could hear how much the memory still mattered to him. Suddenly, I understood something I had missed before. The donations. The scholarships. The attention he paid to schools. It was never about publicity. It was personal. Deeply personal. As we left the cafe later that afternoon, the rain had finally stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds. For the first time since I met him, I found myself wondering whether fate had brought us together for a reason. What I did not know was that other people had started asking the same question. And unlike me, they were not happy about the answer. The first sign appeared on a Monday morning. I arrived at school carrying a stack of reading assignments and nearly dropped them when I saw 2 reporters standing across the street. At first, I assumed they were covering something unrelated. Then one of them pointed a camera in my direction. My stomach tightened instantly. By lunchtime, 3 more reporters had appeared. Parents whispered in the hallways. Teachers exchanged worried looks in the faculty lounge. Nobody said anything directly, but I could feel the shift. People were watching me differently. That evening, my phone would not stop vibrating. Messages from friends, former classmates, even relatives I had not spoken to in years. "Have you seen the news?" I opened one article and immediately wished I had not. A photograph of Ethan and me leaving the coffee shop filled the screen. Another showed us talking at the fundraiser. Another captured us standing together outside the school. The headlines were worse. Billionaire linked to Brooklyn teacher. Mystery woman captures Blackwell's attention. Questions raised about foundation connections. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The articles made it sound as if I had carefully planned every interaction. As if helping Lily had been some elaborate strategy. By Tuesday, things became even stranger. A parent requested that her child be transferred out of my class. Another accused the school of accepting favors. The principal defended me immediately, but the damage had already started. Rumors spread faster than facts ever could. That night, Ethan called. The moment I heard his voice, frustration exploded out of me. "Did you know this was happening?" Silence. Then a quiet answer. "I knew there were rumors." "Rumors?" I repeated. "There are reporters outside my school." "Claire." "No," I interrupted. "I need an honest answer. How many people are watching my life because of you?" The question hung between us. Heavy, uncomfortable. Finally, Ethan exhaled. More than there should be. My chest tightened. That is not an answer. Another silence followed. I have a security team that monitors public attention surrounding people close to me. I froze. People close to you? Claire, have they been watching me? The pause told me everything. Suddenly dozens of moments made sense. The scholarship. The perfectly timed donations. Opportunities appearing out of nowhere. Coincidences that no longer felt like coincidences. My heart sank. How long? I whispered. Since the fundraiser, he admitted. The betrayal hit harder than I expected. Not because he wanted to help. Because he never told me. You had no right. His voice softened. I was trying to protect you. From what? I asked. From a world I understand better than you do. Tears burned behind my eyes. I never asked for protection. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I heard something unfamiliar in his voice. Regret. Real regret. I know, he said quietly. That is the part one keep getting wrong. After the call ended, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the city lights beyond my window. For the first time since meeting Ethan Blackwell, I was not thinking about his kindness. I was thinking about his power. And I was starting to wonder whether there was any difference between protection and control at all. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in almost 3 years. I could not face the reporters waiting outside the school. I could not face the whispers. Most of all, I could not face the realization that the life I had worked so hard to build no longer felt like my own. Rain tapped softly against my apartment window as I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through article after article. Every headline seemed worse than the last. Anonymous sources claimed I had used my connection to gain professional advantages. Commentators questioned my integrity. Complete strangers debated my character as if they had known me for years. None of them knew anything about me. Yet somehow they all had opinions. Around noon, my principal called. Her voice sounded tired. Claire, I wanted you to hear this from me first. My stomach dropped instantly. Hear what? A long pause followed. The school board wants to conduct a review. I closed my eyes. A review of what? Your relationship with the foundation. The donations. The scholarship offer. My chest tightened. I turned the scholarship down. I know that. Unfortunately, not everyone seems interested in facts right now. After the call ended, I sat motionless for several minutes. The room felt smaller somehow. The walls closer. The future less certain. That evening, there was a knock at my door. I already knew who it was before I opened it. Ethan stood in the hallway holding an umbrella. Rainwater glistened on his coat. He looked exhausted. More exhausted than I had ever seen him. Can I come in? He asked quietly. Every part of me wanted to say no. Every part of me wanted to blame him for all of it. Instead, I stepped aside. We sat across from each other at my tiny kitchen table. The same table where I graded papers and paid bills. Suddenly, it felt impossibly small for a conversation this important. I am sorry, he said. No excuses. No explanations. Just 3 words. You cannot fix this with an apology. I know. His voice was barely above a whisper. Then why are you here? For a moment, he stared down at his hands. When he finally looked up, something in his expression stopped me cold. He looked afraid. Because people are coming after you to get to me. The honesty caught me off guard. What does that mean? It means there are people who would rather see me fail than succeed. He exhaled slowly. And they realized you matter to me. The room fell silent. My heart stumbled. Not because of what he said. Because of how easily he said it. As if it was simply the truth. As if there was no point pretending otherwise. Ethan, you do matter to me, Claire. His blue eyes never left mine. More than you should. I looked away first. The weight of those words felt too heavy. Too dangerous. My career is falling apart. I know. People think I manipulated you. I know. Everything is a mess. His answer came immediately. Then let me help. I laughed bitterly. That is exactly what caused this. For the first time, a faint smile touched his face. Sad. Defeated. Understanding. Fair point. Neither of us spoke after that. Rain continued falling outside. Traffic moved through the wet streets below. Finally, Ethan stood and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. I cannot promise this gets easier, he said softly. But I can promise you will not face it alone. After he left, I stood by the window watching his car disappear into the rain. Part of me wanted to believe him. Another part knew that staying close to Ethan Blackwell might cost me everything I had left. 3 days later, the review became official. I sat across from a panel of school administrators in a conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and old paperwork. Rain tapped against the windows. A stack of documents sat in front of them. My name appeared on every page. Questions came one after another. Had I received gifts from the Blackwell Foundation? Had I benefited from personal connections? Had I influenced funding decisions? I answered honestly. Every answer was the same. No, no, no. By the end of the meeting, I felt exhausted. Not because I had done anything wrong. Because I was being forced to defend a version of myself that did not exist. When I finally returned home that evening, another surprise was waiting. Every major business network was covering a breaking story. Ethan stood at the center of it. His company's stock had fallen sharply. Several board members had publicly criticized recent leadership decisions. Financial analysts debated whether he was becoming a liability to his own organization. The timing felt too perfect, too coordinated. I picked up my phone and called him immediately. He answered on the second ring. "You should not be worrying about me right now," he said before I could speak. "You are losing billions of dollars," I replied. "And you are worried about my career." His laugh sounded tired. "That sounds exactly like something you would say." I walked toward the window overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered beneath a blanket of gray clouds. "Tell me what is happening." Silence lingered for several seconds. Then Ethan finally answered. "Some people on the board think I have become distracted. By me. By priorities they do not understand." I closed my eyes. "It is because of me. Claire." His voice sharpened slightly. "Stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Taking responsibility for decisions you did not make." The certainty in his tone caught me off guard. "You did not ask reporters to follow you. You did not create the rumors. You did not tell investors how to react." He paused. "And you certainly did not tell me to care about you." My heart stumbled. Outside, headlights moved through the evening traffic below. "This is affecting your company. The company will survive. And if it does not." For the first time, he did not answer immediately. The silence felt heavier than any words could have. Finally, he spoke. "Then I will build something new." I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second, stunned. Ethan Blackwell had spent years creating one of the most successful companies in the country. Entire industries paid attention when he made decisions. Yet he sounded completely calm, discussing the possibility of losing it all. "How can you say that so easily?" I whispered. "Because I spent most of my life building things," he replied softly. "And recently I realized I forgot why I was building them in the first place." After the call ended, I stood alone in the dark apartment long after sunset. For weeks, I had been focused on everything I was losing. My privacy, my reputation, my peace. I had never stopped to consider what Ethan might be sacrificing too. Then the next morning, the news became impossible to ignore. 3 board members had demanded his resignation. And for the first time since this began, I realized the people coming after me were no longer their primary target. They were coming after him now. The following week felt like watching a storm approach in slow motion. Every morning brought another headline. Every afternoon brought another rumor. Every evening brought another analyst predicting Ethan's downfall. I returned to work after the review concluded with no findings against me, but the relief was temporary. The damage to my reputation lingered. Parents still whispered. Reporters still waited outside the school. Yet none of it compared to what Ethan was facing. One Thursday evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Lily's caretaker. Ethan had missed a family dinner. Then another. Then another. Board meetings stretched late into the night. Emergency investor calls filled his schedule. The pressure surrounding him seemed endless. I told myself it was none of my business. Then my phone rang. Ethan's name appeared on the screen. The moment I answered, I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "Where are you?" I asked. "Office." I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 10 at night. "Have you eaten?" Silence answered the question. I grabbed my coat. 45 minutes later, I stepped into the lobby of Blackwell Tower carrying a paper bag filled with sandwiches and coffee. The building was nearly empty. Most floors were dark. The receptionist recognized me immediately and directed me upstairs. When the elevator doors opened, I found Ethan alone in a conference room surrounded by financial reports and glowing computer screens. For a moment, he simply stared at me. "What are you doing here?" he asked. I placed the food on the table, making sure a stubborn billionaire remembers how to eat. To my surprise, he laughed. A real laugh. The first one I had heard in weeks. We ate in silence for a few minutes. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered beneath the night sky. Finally, Ethan leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. Today they offered me a deal. My stomach tightened. What kind of deal? He looked toward the city. Distance yourself from Claire Parker. Publicly. My heart stopped. The room suddenly felt very quiet. And I asked carefully. And the board believes everything will calm down if I do. He said it matter-of-factly. No anger. No drama. Just truth. I stared down at my coffee cup. Maybe they are right. The words hurt more than I expected. Ethan's gaze snapped toward me immediately. Do not do that. Do what? Decide for me. The intensity in his voice caught me off guard. I am trying to help. No, he shook his head. You are trying to make the decision easier. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The city lights reflected across the glass behind him. Then he exhaled slowly. Claire, for most of my life, people have told me what matters. Growth, profit, market share, public perception. His eyes met mine. You were the first person who ever made me question whether those things were enough. My chest tightened. Ethan, I already know what they want me to choose. His voice softened. The question is whether I can live with myself afterward. When I finally left the tower that night, the cold air felt sharper than usual. As my taxi pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the building stretching into the darkness above Manhattan. For the first time, I understood the choice standing in front of him. One path protected everything he had built. The other protected the people he cared about. And deep down, I think both of us already knew which path Ethan Blackwell was going to take. The press conference was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Monday morning. By 9:30, every major news network in the country was broadcasting live from outside Blackwell Tower. Reporters filled the sidewalks. Cameras pointed toward the entrance. Financial analysts speculated about resignations, leadership changes, and emergency restructuring plans. Inside my apartment, I sat frozen on the edge of my couch with the television muted. My phone had not stopped ringing for hours. Friends, co-workers, reporters, even people I barely knew wanted to know what Ethan Blackwell was going to do. The truth was simple. I had no idea. The last message he sent arrived just after sunrise. I need you to trust me. That was it. No explanation. No details. Just 6 words. At 9:52, my phone rang. Ethan. My heart immediately started racing. Where are you? He asked. Home. Good. His voice sounded calm. Too calm. Ethan, what is happening? A brief silence followed. I am finishing something. Finishing what? Another pause. Then he exhaled softly, running from difficult decisions. Before I could respond, the line went quiet. The call ended. At exactly 10 o'clock, Ethan stepped onto the stage inside the conference center. The room exploded with camera flashes. Reporters shouted questions before he even reached the podium. He ignored all of them. Behind him sat members of the board, investors, advisors, people who had spent weeks pressuring him to make a choice. Ethan adjusted the microphone and looked across the room. For the first time since all of this started, I thought he looked completely certain. Good morning, he said. The room immediately fell silent. Over the past several weeks, there has been extensive discussion regarding my leadership, my judgment, and my personal life. He paused. Today I would like to address all 3. Reporters leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. Even through the television screen, I could feel the tension. Then Ethan did something nobody expected. He began talking about teachers, about education, about communities, about opportunities that changed lives. He spoke about his sister, about the values she believed in, about the reason he started supporting schools long before anyone was paying attention. The room grew quieter with every sentence. Then came the moment that changed everything. A reporter stood and asked the question everyone had been waiting for. Are you willing to distance yourself from Claire Parker to protect your position? My breath caught. The entire country seemed to stop moving. Ethan did not hesitate. Not for a second. No, the answer echoed through the room. Clear. Simple. Absolute. Murmurs spread instantly. Reporters exchanged stunned looks. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ethan continued. For weeks, people have treated Claire Parker like a problem that needs to be solved. His voice remained steady. She is not the problem. Another wave of camera flashes exploded. She is a teacher who dedicated her life to helping children. She has shown more integrity under pressure than most public figures ever will. My eyes filled with tears. Ethan never looked away from the crowd. If defending someone who has done nothing wrong makes me unfit to lead, then perhaps I am leading the wrong organization. The room erupted. Questions flew from every direction. Analysts looked stunned. Reporters scrambled to update headlines in real time. Yet through all of it, Ethan stood completely still. And in that moment, I finally understood. This was never about winning. It was never about reputation. It was never about saving a company. It was about deciding what kind of person he wanted to be when everything he valued was placed on the scale. And Ethan Blackwell had just made his choice in front of the entire world. 1 year later, the first thing I noticed was the sound. Children laughing, running across a playground, calling to one another beneath a bright spring sky. The new school stood on a quiet street in Brooklyn, surrounded by trees that had finally begun to bloom after a long winter. Fresh paint covered the walls. New computers filled the classrooms. Shelves overflowed with books. Everywhere I looked, there was evidence that somebody had believed this place was worth building. I stood near the entrance greeting families arriving for the annual community celebration. Parents carried folding chairs. Students raced toward their friends. Teachers balanced trays of cookies and lemonade. It felt ordinary, wonderfully ordinary, the kind of day I once feared I would never have again. "Miss Parker," a familiar voice shouted. Lily ran across the courtyard and threw her arms around me. She was taller now, more confident, happier. I hugged her tightly before she pulled away and pointed toward the parking lot. "He is late again." I laughed. Some things never change. A black SUV turned the corner at that exact moment. Ethan stepped out wearing a simple navy jacket instead of an expensive business suit. The sight still surprised me sometimes. A year earlier, every newspaper in the country seemed obsessed with his decisions. Every financial network tracked his every move. Today, he looked like a man finally learning how to breathe. His company had changed dramatically after the press conference. Some investors left. Some board members resigned. Entire headlines predicted disaster. Yet somehow, Ethan had remained standing. Not because he fought harder than everyone else. Because he finally stopped building a life around other people's expectations. Together, we walked through the school grounds greeting students and families. Nobody treated him like a celebrity. Nobody asked about stock prices. The children only cared that he remembered their names and attended every fundraiser. Later that afternoon, after the celebration ended, we sat alone on a bench overlooking the playground. The sun hung low above the rooftops. Golden lights stretched across the empty swings. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. We simply watched the world settle into evening. "Do you regret it?" I asked quietly. Ethan looked at me. "Regret what?" "Everything it cost." A faint smile appeared. He glanced toward the school building, toward the children, toward the community gathered around it. Then he shook his head. "For years, I thought success meant protecting what I had built." His voice softened. "Turns out it meant protecting what mattered." My eyes filled with tears before I could stop them. Not because of the words. Because I finally understood how much they had cost him to learn. The evening breeze carried laughter from a nearby street. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang softly across the neighborhood. Ethan reached for my hand. This time, I did not pull away. Looking back, people always ask whether a billionaire changed my life. They expect a story about money, power, or influence. The truth is much simpler. A lost little girl stood in the rain one afternoon. A tired teacher decided to stay beside her. And a man who could have chosen comfort instead chose courage. In the end, that choice changed all of our lives. Because sometimes the most valuable promise is not the one that protects your future. It is the one that reminds you who you are when the entire world asks you to be someone else.